So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to our panelists for today. So if you guys want to kind of introduce yourselves, over to you guys.
Yeah, I suppose I'll dive in first. So my name's Jamie. I'm one of the implementation managers here at Access Planet. Been with Access Planet for nearly 7 years now, and have led many people through big changes in the organisation, technology-wise anyway.
I'm Tom Giblin, calling from TG10, a business management consultancy that I set up with my colleague Gareth to support people through those changes with business analysis and project management too.
So I'm Gareth, and as Tom explained, in partnership with Tom at TG10, and yeah, my background is business analysis, project management, that kind of thing. So yeah, looking to deliver change where we can.
Cool, thanks for that, guys. Okay, so should we get on today with today's webinar? So who wants to kick us off?
I'll start. So yeah, just if we can move on to the first slide, thank you. Yeah, so we've summarised here the change management process, the full life cycle of change. We want to keep it as I suppose as easy to absorb as possible. So we've put things in three groups. There's a 9-stage process, 21-stage process, depending on which sources you look at. But we really want to boil it down to the most, I suppose, practically useful toolkit, as it were. So especially for today's presentation. So and please feel free to ask any questions as we go through, and we'll try and come back to you towards the end or after the session. So as you can see on screen, business value has to be at the core of everything from a change perspective, and trying to set some expectations on the value of that change right up front is absolutely key in that initiate stage. So as you can see on the right hand side, it's really the initiate is really that chance to get the analysis done and the business case formed to really justify why we would go through that phase of change, to really try and make sure that it's a worthwhile process up front, and to gain buy-in from all the stakeholders involved. So we'll talk about the initiate stage, and we'll move on to the implement, which is really the getting the analysis brought to life, and very importantly, bringing all your stakeholders with you through that process. We'll talk about sort of communication plan too, and then onto realize, which is really where the benefit gets implemented gets brought to life within the business itself. So and an ROI, the all important ROI gets realized.
Yeah, we could have the next slide, if that's all right. So in terms of change, I think this is kind of a really prevalent topic at the minute, especially this year with the situation that everybody's sick of hearing about, COVID. Business has been going through a lot of change recently, and now change can come about for many reasons. It can be a change in market conditions, it could be a change in legislation, whatever that may be. So change can take different forms and come at different times. And I think there's quite a lot to think about when approached with a change that needs to be made. It's very easy to think of A to B solutions, to problem solving in any kind of format. But especially when managing change in business, we need to kind of think a little bit wider. There's a beginning, a middle, and end. There's a journey to this change. So one of the key things really to think about is once a change, a business change is identified, we need to make sure the route that we plan to take and whatever else needs to be fully understood throughout the organization and by everybody involved, all the stakeholders here as well. So there is a lot to think about in terms of change. It's not just a case of quick wins. It's a big thing.
I think as well, Jamie, just to touch on the technology side of things, you know, often there's a resistance to change, as I'm sure you know we'll have all experienced previously. But it's about making sure that the benefits are quite clearly explained to the stakeholders. You know, to actually get their project approved in the first place. Often, you know, to try and quantify those benefits, and technology, you know, given that's common ground between two organisations. Yeah, there's some very clear, you know, to go through a digital transformation project, or to try and, you know, in simpler terms, just to migrate really from manual processes to a more digital platform is often quite often easier to quantify with the cost and resource changes benefits.
Yeah, I think especially in my field, obviously I'm helping implement software systems, and that's quite a big business change in itself. And oftentimes it's very good. What I try and do at the start of any project is make sure that everybody who's going to be affected by this change, by this piece of software, is going to be involved and has their say in it as well. Because no matter what change we have, you know, we need the buy-in from everybody if we're going to make this successfully and transition successfully. But there is also kind of like precursors to that as well. I think I don't know what you guys think, but you know, identifying, you know, whether this is the right time to make any kind of change, whether it's the right time to implement, whether it's a new system, a new department, a new warehouse, whatever that looks like in your business. You know, is this the right time? Do we have the funds in place to financially support it? Do we have the people, the expertise in place to do this? You know, and this is the kind of beginning, middle, and end to the change, and this is really the start of that.
Yeah. I would sort of add to that, not underestimating what's ahead of you, I guess, what the challenge is, and that's where things like the business case, requirements, etc. You've got to build that picture. You've got to start somewhere. Typically, that is a business case. If you want to move maybe to the next slide, Joe. So this is kind of where we were going to lead this chat next. So business case, you know, why do you want to make the change? What are the objectives? Things like that. Requirements, how you go about getting your requirements, and a bit of stakeholder analysis, which again you would use later in the project. So if you just move on, Joe, I think. Yeah, business case, really. I think something to remember here is that the business case, it's very important at the start of the project, but also it's almost like a live document that you need to continually refer to throughout a project. Obviously we put some headings here just to kind of show what would go in a business case, but I think from my perspective it's getting that message across that it's not a one-shot document. You know, it's important to keep an eye on those risks, keep an eye on those benefits, as we'll come on to later in the chat.
I think another point as well on the business case is it's really important to, as a kind of reference tool, to remember why it is that we're making whatever change it is that we're making. I mean, the projects that I work on, the changes that we make, it can take a long time to make those changes. You know, it affects you know, a lot of things in business. There's changes in people, changes in software, changes in IT infrastructure, which can spread over a long, you know, few months, and it is easy at the end of that to lose sight of, you know, why we're doing this in the first place, and everybody kind of gets demoralized. And I think that's why it's important to identify that in the business case and keep that a living, breathing document, so everybody keeps motivated there as well.
Yeah, to a certain extent, it's about we find often that it's about cultivating some demand for that change, and you know, not just sort of selling of the benefits, but engaging with, you know, in gathering those requirements. You can see on screen now, you know, in engaging with the stakeholders, the different end users that are often really keen to get some sort of change because of the headaches that they're experiencing, the pinch points, the things that really take people a lot of time to get done, and the sort of trying to eliminate. Often once you start asking people about how they would like things to change, them builds from that point, and in trying to document how people would want a new solution, whether that's sort of an internal, whether that's a new supplier solution or a piece of software.
Yeah, I think it's really good as well, aligning perspectives, which kind of ties in nicely to stakeholder analysis as well, because the changes that we make, whether it's software, it can affect a lot of different people, and everybody has different expectations, different wants and need from this change, different expected benefits. And I think aligning these with the company strategy, so everybody's focused on the same goal, I think that's really key with anything really.
Yeah. So writing this sort of thing down as part of that initiation phase really makes it real until it's written down. We often find, I'm sure Gareth will have 100 stories about where that there's just been assumptions made left, right, and centre, and until someone actually writes it down and feeds it back, it's quite difficult almost for people to buy in and visualize it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Joe, would you mind going back one if you don't mind? Thank you. Yeah, so I suppose this kind of ties in as well. So it's the defining requirements, one which I come across quite a lot. And I think this ties into, again, everybody being aligned to business objectives and aligning with that strategy rather than, and having a clear kind of path and objectives that we want to receive from this change. So in order to get everybody's buy-in and to keep everybody motivated during any change, I think it's good to get their requirements, what they want to get out there. But there is a good and a bad way to do that. So I think there are a lot of people who've dabbled with requirements, definitions, and documents, and we see these spreadsheets, long lists of requirements in there. And I think it's very easy to kind of lose sight during building that document as to what we're trying to achieve. So I think it's really important to spend the time honing the requirements document so we can clearly define exactly what everybody's after. Because I heard a statistic about kind of software specifically anyway, is that 80% of the issues that arise during software development or implementation were due to poorly defined requirements. So yeah, I think it's really important to, like we mentioned here, don't design the solution, we're just defining the requirements in here. And prioritizing these as well is really important. And the reason being is, I don't know about you guys, but we were talking about value before, everything's about delivering value. So we can prioritize our requirements and meet those. The sooner we can start seeing that return on investment. There may be small changes that we can make to have big benefits, but that's it's all defined in here, I feel.
Yeah, and it's how you get to those requirements as well. So just following that kind of process of, you really need to take a good look at now, the as is. So really try and understand what is happening now, map out processes, get a real good feel for where the problems might lie, because I think it's really tempting to jump straight into a solution, to jump straight into this is what we need, this is what we need to do, this is how we think we want to do it.
Yeah.
But that's you're kind of jumping ahead in that process. So it's really important to spend some good time, good quality time, a bit of analysis, working out what's happening now, and then that will guide you to where you want to get to, because you can see the problems, you can try and explain how you want to fix them in this kind of to-be world, if you like.
Yeah, I think there's different ways that everybody can do that as well. There's different tools that you can use. So obviously we can have a spreadsheet full of requirements, and that's fine. But we've got things like business activity models, process flow charts, as is to-be models. There's loads of tools that we can use to define.
That's it.
These. So.
And the requirements are your end goal, really. That's where you want to get to after you've gone through all that sort of journey, and you've you've spoken to everyone you can possibly speak to,
Yeah.
who might be involved in the project, because you don't want to miss something. That's where you'll feel the pain later on if you haven't engaged somebody somewhere.
That time invested up front in speaking to all the different stakeholder groups, all the different types of end user, all the people that are responsible for the solution or impacted by the solution, and compartmentalizing, grouping together those stakeholders, but grouping together the requirements as well. Gareth, is that
Sorry, say that last. You're very crackly, Tom. At the very last part, you crackled quite a lot.
Is it worth talking about some of the sort of how we group those requirements together, in a both from a sort of the type of requirement as well as how we prioritize?
Yeah, I suppose where you've got functional requirements, you've got non-functional requirements, and I think that people get a bit confused about those sometimes, but ultimately non-functionals are just trying to talk about things like availability, performance, that kind of thing. Obviously functionality, I think that kind of describes itself a bit more, but the way I often see that is if you've mapped out the process that is behind whatever it is you're looking to build, that kind of gives you your big functional chunks, and then it's making sure the requirements kind of map to those chunks. That's how I would kind of approach it, and also thinking about the SMART acronym, which is a bit of a cliche, but it really help you when you're writing requirement. Keep it short, like this good example here. It needs to be something that's easily testable, and it don't start being tempted to wrap more requirements into what is essentially what should be one requirement.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem that I've faced with requirements in the past is just assumptions. Really, that's really key. Your idea of how something will work may not be the same as somebody else's. I speak with many different types of people. I speak with CEOs, I speak with finance managers, I speak with our developers, I speak with other people's developers, and everybody speaks a bit different language and assumes different things. So it's really important to define, the who and the what and the why. I think the how kind of comes later with other tools as well. But
absolutely.
Should we move on to the next slide?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. So to that point that Jamie just made there around the who, understanding who's going to be interested and why, what sort of role they're going to play, how much influence they can have over whether the project is a success or not, will come from sometimes very different angles, whether they be the sort of project sponsor, very sort of senior level, or whether they are someone that's resistant to it within a but an informal setting of influence, almost being able to influence within a from a super user type scenario, to be a advocate of the project moving forward. So to gain those sorts of people that can influence, gain their buy-in early is or to understand, just by using this sort of layout. We wanted to put up on screen here just to make sure that we've got that this could be a document that could spread, depending on the sort of size and impact, the breadth of the scope of the change, can be used to really sort of categorize how the communication would take place throughout the project, and to Gareth's point, around the sort of work in progress document, a really sort of one to be used throughout the whole project.
I agree. I think there's another important point with stakeholders as well. Common thing that can get missed is that stakeholders aren't just going to be the people using the system, or the workers, or whomever. We were also talking about people who might be affected at all. That might be suppliers, partners, regulators. There's a whole host of people who can be affected by this as well. And I've been in situations before where you know, we're so far through a project, and we need to bring in a developer from an external company, and that's thrown everything out of whack because they weren't informed, we didn't have their requirements, and that's obviously caused issues. So it's really good to have prior to starting anything, really thinking about who is going to be affected by this, who do we need to be involved, and what do they need from this as well.
Yeah, and staff or resources might change during the project, and this kind of thing again, it's a good place to direct people to, you know, when they come in fresh, they're not entirely sure of the structure or maybe of the organization or the project, and these things I think are pretty important to have and then maintain, and I think often overlooked.
Yeah, so it's really important for onboarding as well, because the success of any project, any change that we make is only as successful as everybody who's been involved. If they accept it, then it's successful. If you get some key stakeholders who don't accept it, you know, it often falls flat on its face, and we need to think of other scenarios, and that's where we fall into issues. So yeah,
back to that idea of more time invested in this project initiation phase, the smoother, hopefully, the less. There's always going to be bumps in the project as you go forward, but this hopefully smooths some of them out, or you can foresee some of those and mitigate them. Is it worth talking about anything else on this? I suppose that idea that we touched on just right at the beginning about sort of bringing people with you through the process. Because this can be, the column is over to the right hand side around how they're engaged, how stakeholders are engaged, how people are engaged through the change process. What information, what input they need right at the beginning, but also how they need to be updated and incorporated through the process.
Sure.
So should we move on to the next slide?
Yeah. So I think this one we're getting into implementation of a project, and again, some of the things to think about before you hit that stage. Resources is a tricky one, or can be a tricky one, I guess, because the changes can be quite labor intensive, can be. So you might need some extra staff in the business, or you might need to look outside of the business to do that. And sometimes that could be the supplier that you've chosen to go with anyway. They might be resourcing an aspect of what you're going to do. Communication plan, as we were saying, linking again to that kind of stakeholder analysis, you need something in place then to sort of communicate within the project and outside of the project. And some of that you've got governance, I guess, to think about in this kind of thing. We might have, say, project boards or some other gateways that you want to get to, and it all links to that this big topic. Tom, do you want to talk about the sort of supplier stuff?
On the supply due diligence side of things, it's really making sure that those suppliers that you're engaging with, whether that's to bring about any sort of change, whether it's a new solution that you're bringing into the business, new digital solution, new software, an infrastructure change, is really just to perform that selection process, perform that. Making sure that the supplier's got the skill set that you're expecting them for is, again, really important to have those requirements defined up front so that there's a structure around that conversation, around that due diligence, rather than getting a number of supplier people to that point around trying to solution these things before you've got the requirements. Sometimes people jump out to speak to suppliers thinking they can shortcut that process, and often that just adds time on the back end of the project. So it's making sure they've got the right skill set, capabilities, and to meet with those requirements that you've drawn together beforehand. And market research ties into that. Sorry, Jamie.
No, I was just thinking it's a good point. Having those requirements defined, especially from my perspective in terms of software, having the requirements beforehand really helps, because like you say, if those are loosely defined requirements, that's when you tend to run into issues, especially software or digital products, that kind of thing. If we have to probe further into those requirements halfway through a project, and you know, that's when it really causes issues. So yeah, can't stress clearly enough defining that.
It's managing expectations as well, isn't it? You know, we expect the solution to do this. Well, you know, and the market research is what helps really. That next point is what helps to understand. You know, sometimes suppliers just do something completely different, but there's you know, it's not that it's wrong. It's just that it's just a mismatch of expectations. So yeah, that's supply research, and that's you know, moving. You can only really do that, and we'll come on to sort of agile and waterfall methodology, I suppose, in a slide or two. But that sort of, you know, there's a sort of sequence to these things that can be done somewhat in what's the word I'm looking for, in, you know, in parallel to each other simultaneously, but there's a certain sequence to be able to make sure that you've got those requirements, you know, defined to the right level before you can start doing that research. But that's again the sort of time invested in implementing what's been found.
I think methodology, Joe, was actually on the previous slide. Not that there's much on there as such, but you know what I'm saying. Yeah, so it is an important one, methodology, because I guess waterfall is the kind of traditional method, and quite often for a lot of organizations, I think there isn't a lot of choice about that. Well, obviously there isn't a lot of choice about the methodology they might do, but waterfall, quite often it might be a desire to be agile, but actually there's a whole procurement process up front, and it's really wanted that there's a very defined view of what you need, and you've got that challenge, and it's are you agile or are you waterfall? But yeah, so there's bearing that in mind. It may not be a choice, I guess, which method you're going to do, but and the agile approach is different again. Yeah,
lots of benefits to be brought from both, I think, should be said as well. There's and aspects that can be drawn in from agile into it doesn't have to be software development. They
both work, and it's all how you set up, how you plan your meetings and all the rest of it. But Agile is a thing these days, I think. Can't ignore that.
Yeah, inflationary too. Yeah,
because there's that desire to really know upfront what it is you want to define.
Yeah,
and be reactive when you get there. That's a bit of a challenge.
Okay.
Yeah, should we move on? Next slide.
So I'll start this one off. So this is project realization, or benefits realization, more than anything. So I think what's really important when making any change, like we say, is to work backwards really, and identify the objective. I don't know how well you can see that slide on there, but our objective in this case is to increase customer satisfaction, which is quite ambitious, quite arbitrary. So you know, we really trying to break this down into a kind of common sense format that everybody can see a high level overview of the changes and the steps that are going to lead us to reach that objective, basically. And I think it's very easy to lose sight of, with everything that goes on during change, whether it's software, whether it's warehouses, new branches, whatever that may be. There is a lot that goes into that. It's very easy to lose sight of, you know, what's the next objective, what's the next milestone, and what benefit will that give us. So using something like a benefits dependency map can really assist with that. So I think identifying and identifying this up front before we start implementing any kind of change is a really beneficial tool as well. For everybody involved, and everybody who's going to be involved in actively making those changes. So I think there are a lot of tools very similar to this out there online as well. You give a Google, you'll find plenty of templates, but I would highly recommend, you know, anything that you're thinking of doing, I would highly recommend using a benefits dependency map. It's a good reference tool as well. when you've completed whatever change it may be, looking back 12 months after and seeing, you know, what benefit did we expect to receive? You know, did we want to reduce our delivery time by 30%? And if we're tracking that as a no, we haven't achieved that, we can look at why, you know, the changes that we were meant to make and the immediate benefits, you know, did we make those things? Is the work elsewhere we need to take a look at? And this can be applied with anything. I think it's a really powerful tool and one that often goes underused, to be honest.
Yes, good. I like the look of this. And obviously business case, so all of the benefits that you were looking to achieve, ideally you mapped those out, you captured those in the business case right at the start anyway, and it's something measurable, something that you can put some sort of metrics on it. So yeah, ideally when you get to this point, you are showing that you did what you set out to do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because I mean, changes. I think it's quite easy when, especially in my experience with software, you know, there is a sole objective of implementing a system, but there is a lot of kind of background stuff. If you take a step back, there's a lot of background stuff that goes along with that, and that can be changes to processes, changes to people in the organization, teams, and you know, it's a much wider thing. So really identifying the extent of this change and the ripples in the water, really, before you get into it is going to help.
Yeah, I think on this slide there's quite a scary stat. Yeah.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, the I suppose it's those two numbers joined together, isn't it? The mixed results and the 34% from the 50% from clear failure. Those two joined together in a report from Gartner to say that there's often a lot of bumps in the road for change projects, and as Jamie mentions, you know, there's a lot of things to consider. Which actually, once you've written them down, once you're tracking those things, if you use some of the approaches that we're talking about today, it becomes a heck of a lot easier to manage those challenges. But this was an industry-wide across a number of different sectors that this report was taken from. These stats were taken from. So it's just having those expectations managed, because there's a hell of a lot of perception involved too. That you know, with those communication approaches that we talked about previously, some of that can be eliminated by actually knowing really what is happening and when, and being able to measure that success, as Jamie just talked through, is key to kind of confirming that there was a successful change made. You know, as you come towards that, towards the end, the final, the project summary evaluation towards the end, to actually work out what the changes have been and what's been realised. And part of that is, you know, to the number on the side as well, is, you know, cutting out inefficiency and reducing administration, which is part of the Access Planet offering.
Cool. Okay, so thanks for that, guys. Some very interesting topics discovered there. I've actually made about 2 or 3 pages of notes myself, actually, listening through all those you guys talking about it. So thanks very much from my standpoint. We have had quite a few questions through. I'm just conscious of time, so I've just picked out 3 or 4 the best ones. So the first question I've got for you guys is, how do you deal with resistance to change?
With a big stick. No, I'm joking. No, I think it's good to mitigate resistance before it happens, ideally. And the way you do that is using things like the stakeholder analysis. If you can get a good understanding of everybody's requirements, what their wants and needs are up front, and you know, you can mitigate that. If conflict does arise, and then delving into you know, what those issues are. I think is key, really. Communication.
Yeah.
What do you say?
Yeah, for me, it's that analysis. Really, what if there's resistance, it's usually maybe because, I don't know, there's a misunderstanding, or there's something that hasn't come across somewhere. So yeah, trying to work out why there's resistance, and so you can break that down into, I don't know, maybe options to get around it.
Yeah, I was working for a company a little while ago who took it to sort of that engagement up front to take on board requirements to understand where the challenges for the end users were, or different, you know, across the board. An ideas factory was set up that was completely anonymous, but there was a an internal web page set up where you could submit ideas on you know, all very constructive, obviously, of what sort of changes could be made, or what they were finding a real challenge on, on a particular topic, that worked really well and that they were actually kind of, they went another step further. They gave, they were putting up sort of a leaderboard of which of those suggestions or requirements were going to be deployed
really
when, to make it really, and actually a kind of a sort of an update, which just brought people in, it just made it.
Yeah, I was going to say buy-in is a big one. Yeah,
communication.
If it helps with that.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, and another question: how do you know if you need external professional support with change?
Yeah, I think we touched on it a number of times previously, that there's a real sort of time and almost not dedicated, maybe not full-time dedicated, but sometimes an integration with project management, because there's so many sort of crossovers in the disciplines between change and project management, that sometimes, those sorts of skill sets, either you might not have them available at that particular time, or you might not have them available to do that upfront, invest that time up front. So it's really a sort of a resource availability and a skill set availability that we find.
Okay, cool. Okay, just a couple more questions from the ones that have come through. So have you got any advice on how to prioritize requirements when it comes to kind of building up that picture of what's required for a business?
Yeah, I would say it's trying to think about what effect that requirement has sometimes, So how many users maybe is it going to affect? Because quite often you'll get every requirement is a must have, or a lot of requirements. It's a must. But, yeah, but it's balancing that. It's balancing. Okay, what's the impact of this requirement? It can be a difficult conversation at times, but that's one aspect.
I think aligning requirements with kind of the business strategy as well, really honing in on that, what is it that's key to the business? Is everything else a nice to have? And I think it's very, very easy to blur the lines between that, and really focusing on that objective, like what is it that we need to achieve with this, and everything else kind of centers around that and fits into it.
Yeah, and look up the 80-20 rule. It's a bit of a rule of thumb, but it's worth looking into.
Cool, okay. And one final question was, Gareth, you kind of talked us through the waterfall agile piece, but then you also mentioned Wagile. So I'm assuming that is a combination of waterfall and agile. But between agile and Wagile? Sorry. So can you just elaborate a little bit on what exactly Wagile kind of entails?
Well, that's a bit scary. I suppose in my experience of it is that it's being in a world where traditionally, if you're going to go into procurement, people really want to know down to the finest detail, what are we doing, what are we asking for?
Yeah.
And sometimes unless you go to suppliers saying, well, we're going to take an agile approach, it's a bit chicken and egg about how big is it, how small is it, etc. And if you start off waterfall, so agile is kind of starting waterfall, but then when you get into implementation, you might take an agile approach.
Okay, cool.
where you're setting up the team as kind of like an agile team, or as an agile team, and you use maybe Scrum to get through that development process. And yeah, it's agile. I think it might be something else, but it can work.
Okay, cool. Well, we are now out of time today, guys. So thank you very much for joining with us today to discuss that. As I say, I mean, I've made reams of notes because I mean, this really impacts pretty much everybody's job. You know, we're all in, especially if a software company, you know, we talk to people day in, day out about how they change their business. So you've helped me, you know, and I'm sure everyone else who's been attending has been helped as well. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you everybody for attending as well. Anyone whose questions weren't answered in today's session, we will follow up with you directly to get them answered as well. So thank you very much, and take care everybody.
Sure.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks everybody. Thanks, Joe.
Bye bye.